In this demo, I'm going to show how to use Lifelines2 to find patients who experienced decreased renal function, possibly as a result of the administration of their radiology contrast procedures. This is indicated by their creatinine high events within 2 weeks after a radiology contrast. Here I have loaded a data set of 3,598 patient records. Each record is represented by a horizontal strip containing the patient ID and the events in the patient's history. Each event is represented by a colored triangle on the timeline. From the legend, I see that creatinine high, normal, and low are in red, blue, green, respectively. Scrolling down, I see that radiology contrast events are in yellow. To examine this data better, I align the patient records by their first radiology contrast events and rank by the number of creatinine high events to bring the most severe patients up top. I immediately realized two things. One, some patients have chronic renal deficiency and they should be removed because their condition is not related to their radiology contrast. Two, some patients have more than one radiology contrast event, and this needs to be taken into consideration. To remove the chronic patients who have at least 4 creatinine high events prior to a radiology contrast, I choose to filter by the number of occurrences on creatinine high. I set the number to be at least 4, and the filter scope to be before the alignment. The blue highlight indicates that these records are selected. For our purposes, we want to remove them. I click on Remove Selected and also save the remaining records as a new group. It's called Nonchronic. Next, instead of aligning by every patient's first radiology contrast, I align by all radiology contrasts in all patients. Lifelines2 asks me whether I will proceed, as some patients will be duplicated. I click on Proceed. Then I bring up the distribution of creatinine high events across these records and zoom into the granularity of days. As I drag from day 1 to day 14, I'm selecting all patients who have at least one creatinine high event within 2 weeks after any of their radiology contrast events. This time, I will click on Keep Selected and save these records as another group. Let's call it Candidates. Looking at this group, we see that this is more of an overestimate. Many of the patients do not exhibit patterns of contrast-related renal deficiency. It would be better if we restrict only patients who have a baseline of normal creatinine prior to their radiology contrasts, without creatinine high events in between. To do this, I will use a sequence filter, specifying only for patients who have at least one creatinine normal reading, followed by no creatinine highs, followed by radiology contrast, and finally followed by at least one creatinine highs. Likewise, I'll click on Keep Selected and save this as a final group. Finally, this gives us 157 records. And visually scanning this group, these patients exhibit more prominently the patterns of contrast-related renal deficiency. And this concludes our demo.